The Galactic War had raged for over a century. Empires rose and fell, alliances shifted like desert sands, and entire species were driven to extinction. At the center of it all stood the Tyrant Dominion, an empire of warlike conquerors who had crushed every civilization that opposed them. Their fleets were vast, their technology millennia ahead of most species, and their ruthlessness unparalleled. For decades, the unified Galactic Council had fought back, but they were losing. The Dominion's biotechnological weapons outmatched conventional energy arms, their starships devoured planets with planet-cracking arrays, and their soldiers were genetically modified nightmares designed for war. Every battle ended the same way, with another world falling to Tyrant rule. The humans, one of the newest species to join the Council, had arrived late to the war. Earth had barely discovered FTL travel when the conflict began, and by the time they joined the galactic stage, the Dominion had already wiped out dozens of civilizations. At first, humans were treated as little more than an annoyance, a backwater species with primitive weapons and laughable fleets. But then something changed. It started small, skirmishes where Dominion fleets mysteriously vanished without a trace. Then sabotage missions where entire supply chains collapsed overnight. The Tyrant admirals dismissed these as statistical anomalies, but the Council saw the pattern. Wherever humans operated, the Dominion suffered setbacks. At first, the other species didn't understand why. Humans had no superior ships, no advanced weapons, no technological edge. They lacked the genetic modifications that made the Tyrants so deadly in ground combat. They weren't the strongest, the fastest, or the smartest species in the war. And yet, they kept winning. It wasn't brute force. It wasn't superior firepower. It was something else. Aboard the UGC Dreadnought Vigilant Honor, Admiral Solarian of the Kelry Alliance stared at the tactical map. "How is this possible?" he muttered. The Dominion had attacked with a fleet 3 times the size of the Defenders. By all calculations, the Council forces should have been wiped out. And yet, the enemy had been utterly routed. The answer came in the form of Captain Elias Voss, a human officer who had spearheaded the defense. He entered the war room, removing his helmet, his uniform covered in scorch marks and battle grime. He was young, with sharp blue eyes and a grin that suggested he had won long before the battle even began. "We don't fight fair," Voss said simply, dropping a data pad onto the table. It displayed the wreckage of the Dominion fleet, scattered like bones across a battlefield. "You keep trying to outgun them. We outthink them." The Council species had fought this war with logic, precision, and overwhelming force, matching fleet against fleet, soldier against soldier. That was why they had lost for a century. The Tyrants expected that. But humans? Humans fought dirty. They lured Dominion fleets into asteroid fields and turned the terrain into weapons. They sabotaged enemy warships mid-battle, causing catastrophic chain reactions. They infected enemy AI systems with unpredictable viruses, forcing ships to turn on each other. They manipulated supply chains to starve entire warfronts before the first shot was fired. And when all else failed, they did something even more terrifying. They adapted. The Tyrants were biologically superior, but they had been designed for war. Their strength was their weakness. They had never needed to learn, to improvise, to evolve tactics on the fly. Humans had been fighting among themselves for thousands of years, and war was chaos. To them, the battlefield wasn't a rigid chessboard. It was a living, breathing puzzle to be exploited. As Captain Voss leaned back, watching the alien admirals pore over his battle strategies, he smirked. "War isn't about who has the best weapons," he said. "It's about who's willing to do whatever it takes to win." And that was why the Dominion would lose. Because the humans were about to introduce the ultimate weapon in the universe. Something no species had ever seen before. Something no enemy could ever predict. And the war would never be the same again. The Unified Galactic Council had assumed that when Captain Elias Voss spoke of the ultimate weapon, he meant some classified human superweapon, a doomsday device hidden away on some forgotten world. The Dominion, arrogant as ever, believed it to be another feeble attempt at resistance. They were both wrong. The ultimate weapon wasn't a machine. It wasn't a bomb. It was humanity itself. ###### The Battle of Korthos Prime. The Dominion fleet arrived at Korthos Prime expecting an easy victory. The planet was home to a major council stronghold, but after a century of war, the Dominion had learned that the other species were predictable. They would either fight a desperate last stand or attempt an orderly retreat. Either way, the Tyrants would crush them. Instead, they found something entirely different. As soon as the first Dominion dreadnought entered orbit, the chaos began. Sabotage supply ships detonated inside the Tyrant formation, sending debris and fire across their battle lines. Asteroid debris, previously thought to be harmless, suddenly shifted trajectory, propelled by hidden human-engineered thrusters. Defensive satellites, long thought inoperable, powered up and began firing precisely at the weakest points in the Dominion shields. And then came the ground war. Tyrant shock troopers stormed the surface, expecting resistance in the form of traditional fortifications, bunkers, trenches, defensive lines. But the humans didn't fight that way. Instead, the Dominion soldiers found themselves trapped in a nightmare of human ingenuity. The streets of Korthos Prime had been transformed into a labyrinth of traps, ambushes, and kill zones. Buildings collapsed unexpectedly, crushing entire squads beneath tons of rubble. Explosives detonated in sewers, sending enemy troops flying before they ever saw the enemy. Worse still, the humans weren't fighting in rigid formations. They were everywhere. Guerrilla units emerged from shadows, striking hard and fast before vanishing like ghosts. Dominion officers, accustomed to facing enemies that fought by the book, found themselves surrounded by an enemy that made up the rules as they went along. And then came the final blow. The Dominion command ship, the Vorkesh, was the heart of the invasion fleet. Its presence alone ensured victory in most battles. But as it prepared to launch a bombardment on the planet's surface, something went wrong. A single human operative had infiltrated the vessel. Not a cybernetic assassin. Not a genetically enhanced warrior. Just a soldier. A man named Lieutenant Adrian Cross. Cross had snuck aboard the Vorkesh using an old Dominion freighter that had been destroyed in the initial attack, except it hadn't. He moved through the ship, using nothing but his wits, a stolen uniform, and sheer human stubbornness. By the time Dominion security realized something was wrong, he was already in the reactor chamber. With nothing more than a handful of explosives and a willingness to die for the mission, he detonated the reactor core. The Vorkesh erupted in a catastrophic explosion that consumed half the Dominion fleet. On the ground, the remaining Dominion forces, now leaderless and cut off from retreat, were wiped out in hours. It was the greatest defeat the Dominion had ever suffered. And it was only the beginning. The destruction of the Vorkesh sent shockwaves through the entire Dominion hierarchy. Never before had they suffered such a catastrophic loss at the hands of an inferior species. The unified Galactic Council had fought them for over a century, yet no battle had ever turned the tide like this. For the first time, the Tyrant Dominion knew fear. ###### The Council's doubt. Despite the victory at Korthos Prime, not everyone in the Council was convinced. This was a fluke, scoffed High Strategist Valon of the Valtari. A well-executed mission, yes, but not a long-term strategy. We cannot rely on luck and reckless heroism. Captain Elias Voss sat at the center of the war table, watching the various species argue. He had expected this. The aliens didn't understand, couldn't understand. Humans weren't stronger. They weren't faster. They weren't more advanced. But they were relentless. We didn't win because of luck, Voss finally said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. We won because we don't fight like you. You treat war like a game with rules. The Tyrants do the same. But humans? He leaned forward, eyes cold. We make our own rules. He tapped a display, revealing a growing list of Dominion losses, all caused by human-led operations. Sabotage, misinformation, Psychological warfare. Attacks where humans outnumbered the enemy 10 to 1, and still emerged victorious. The alien generals exchanged uneasy glances. Voss smiled. The Dominion doesn't fear your fleets. They don't fear your technology. They fear us. ###### The Tyrant response. Deep within Dominion space, Supreme Warlord Zalvaker reviewed the battle reports with a scowl. Every species they had conquered followed a pattern: initial resistance, gradual attrition, eventual surrender. But humans didn't break. They are unpredictable, his war council murmured. Irrational. Dangerous. Then we must remove them from the equation. Thus began Operation Extinguish. The Dominion would do what they had done to 1,000 other species. They would burn every human world to the ground. ###### The Scorched Earth Campaign. Within weeks, Dominion fleets struck deep into human space. Entire colonies were obliterated. Cities, reduced to ash. The Dominion expected panic. They expected humanity to scatter, to beg for mercy. Instead, humanity became something even more terrifying. They became unforgiving. The Dominion had thought they were dealing with just another species, one that would break under the weight of destruction. What they didn't realize was that humanity had never been strangers to war. From the ashes of their burning worlds, humans retaliated with a fury that no species had ever witnessed. Civilian freighters were retrofitted into makeshift warships. Every colony turned into a fortress. Guerrilla forces emerged on occupied worlds, striking Dominion soldiers with relentless hit-and-run tactics. And then came the worst part. The Dominion's own systems started failing. Their supply chains collapsed. Their encrypted communications were compromised. Their warships suffered mysterious malfunctions mid-battle. Entire fleets turned against each other due to misinformation. It wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was humans, using every trick in the book, every strategy, every deception, every ounce of ingenuity, to fight back. For the first time in their empire's history, the Tyrants found themselves in an unwinnable war. Because they weren't fighting an enemy. They were fighting a nightmare. The Tyrant Dominion had expected to wipe humanity from existence. They had launched Operation Extinguish with overwhelming force, burning human worlds, silencing entire colonies, and reducing civilizations to dust. It was supposed to be the end of a minor, insignificant species. Instead, it became the beginning of their own downfall. ###### The Tyrant mistake. The Dominion had never faced an enemy like humanity. Their entire war doctrine was based on crushing resistance through brute force, overwhelming numbers, superior firepower, and sheer terror. And for a century, it had worked. But with humans, fear didn't lead to surrender. It led to rage. For every human world burned, the survivors scattered, and then they struck back. Refugees didn't flee to hide. They became soldiers. Their scientists abandoned peaceful research to create devastating weapons out of whatever they had. Civilians turned their homes into war zones, setting traps for the enemy at every turn. The harder the Tyrants struck, the more vicious humanity became. Terror only worked on species that feared death more than defeat. But humans? They turned war into an art form. ###### The Shadow War begins. As Dominion fleets poured into human space, expecting an easy conquest, they found nothing but ghosts. The moment they arrived at a target, human forces had already vanished, only to reappear on their flanks, attacking with precision. The Dominion's encrypted systems were no longer secure. Human hackers infiltrated their networks, feeding false battle plans and turning Tyrant warships against each other. Supply lines were cut, starbases sabotaged, and entire fleets found themselves lost in space due to manufactured navigational errors. Infiltration squads struck deep behind enemy lines, assassinating Dominion commanders and sowing paranoia. No one knew who could be trusted anymore. This wasn't just war. This was annihilation by 1,000 cuts. ### Hashtag the turning point, the siege of Vericon 5. Vericon 5 was one of the Dominion's most heavily fortified worlds, an industrial powerhouse producing warships, weapons, and supplies at an unimaginable scale. No alien species had ever come close to breaching its defenses. And yet, humanity didn't send an armada. They sent 5 ships. 5 human vessels, disguised as Dominion freighters, slipped through the planet's defense grid unnoticed. By the time alarms sounded, it was too late. The entire planet's orbital defense system shut down. Factory power plants overloaded and exploded. Supply depots were sabotaged. In a single night, the Tyrants lost their primary war production world. It wasn't just a tactical loss. It was a message. We can reach you anywhere. The Dominion's war machine began to crumble. Hashtag the breaking point. With their fleet stranded, their industry collapsing, and their leadership fracturing under the weight of sabotage and assassinations, the Dominion began to turn on itself. Paranoia spread like wildfire. Warlords accused each other of incompetence. Mutinies erupted in once loyal fleets. Entire sectors declared independence. The Tyrants had never been defeated before. They had never been afraid before. But now, they were learning something new. When humans went to war, they didn't just fight to win. They fought to erase their enemies. And the Dominion was running out of time. The once mighty Tyrant Dominion, a juggernaut that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, was beginning to fracture. Their fleets, once disciplined and unstoppable, were now scattered, isolated, and plagued by infighting. Supply lines had collapsed. Their leaders were assassinated one by one. Entire sectors burned, not because of the enemy, but because the Dominion had turned against itself. And at the heart of it all, humanity was still relentless. Hashtag the final push. The unified Galactic Council, seeing the Dominion falter, had hesitated. For over a century, they had known only defeat. Even now, many of their leaders feared retaliation, believing the Tyrants would rebound, as they always had. But Elias Voss knew better. This is the moment, he said, standing before the Council's War Assembly. This is the part where they break. But only if we push. Some still doubted. But humanity did not wait for permission. The humans were already inside Tyrant space. Sabotage teams dismantled starbases from within. Hacker units fed misinformation into Dominion battle networks, causing entire fleets to turn against phantom enemies. The Tyrants, confused, panicked. They abandoned entire sectors just to reinforce phantom battle zones, leaving their core worlds vulnerable. And then, the killing blow. Hashtag the fall of the Tyrant homeworld. The Dominion homeworld, Kalzir, had never seen war. It was the beating heart of their empire, where warlords ruled from their gilded towers, where ships were built by the trillions, where the greatest minds of the Dominion crafted their conquests. The Tyrants had never needed planetary defenses. No one had ever reached them. Until now. A fleet of human civilians, not warships, but converted freighters, scavenged wrecks, and stolen Dominion vessels, dropped out of FTL. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to finish it. Human cyber warfare teams disabled planetary defenses in minutes. Orbital shipyards, hacked and overridden, turned their guns downward, bombarding their own cities. Elite Dominion warriors rushed to fight back, only to realize the humans had already infiltrated the capital. It wasn't an invasion. It was an execution. By the time the Dominion warlords understood what had happened, it was too late. The Council, watching from afar, could not believe it. The Dominion, an empire that had enslaved half the galaxy, had just been brought to its knees by a species that had entered the war last. And yet, humanity wasn't done. Hashtag the offer of extinction. Elias Voss stood before the shattered remains of the Dominion leadership, warlords, admirals, genetic super soldiers, all bound and defeated. They had expected the Council to force peace talks. A treaty. A ceasefire. Instead, Voss placed a single pistol on the table. "This is your only chance," he said. "You can end the Dominion yourselves, right now. Step down. Surrender. Break your own empire." The tyrants scoffed. "And if we refuse?" Voss met their gaze with cold, unshaken fury. "Then humanity will finish what we started." There was no threat. No bluff. Only certainty. For the first time in history, the Dominion, the great conquerors of the galaxy, surrendered star. But not to the Galactic Council. To humanity. And as the war came to a close, one undeniable truth echoed across the stars. The ultimate weapon in the universe was not technology, was not firepower, was not numbers. It was the sheer, unrelenting, terrifying willpower of humanity itself. The war was over. The Dominion, once the unchallenged overlords of the galaxy, had fallen. Their warlords executed, their fleets shattered, their empire reduced to ashes. But victory brought new challenges. The Galactic Council, stunned by humanity's sheer ferocity, struggled to understand what came next. They had fought for survival, never expecting to win. And now, they stood face to face with the species that had turned the impossible into reality. And they weren't sure whether to be grateful or terrified. ###### The fate of the Tyrants. With the Dominion in ruins, the question remained, what to do with the surviving Tyrants? Some council members pushed for mercy. "We are not savages," argued Chancellor Velkir of the Valtari. "We must show them the civilization they denied to others." Others demanded complete eradication. The Vortari, a species nearly wiped out by the Dominion, called for justice in the form of extermination. They would have done the same to us. To all of us. But the only opinion that mattered was humanity's. For a long time, Elias Voss remained silent, staring at the broken remnants of the Tyrant leadership. Then he said, simply, "No empire survives forever. If they rebuild, if they ever try again, humanity will finish what we started." There was no mercy. No unnecessary slaughter. The Dominion's remaining planets were stripped of military power, their war machines dismantled, their people left to decide their own fate. But the Tyrants understood one thing clearly. They were no longer the galaxy's predators. They were prey. ##### Humanity's role in the New Order. For the first time in history, the Galactic Council looked to humanity not as a junior species, not as a reckless upstart, but as the decisive power in the galaxy. They had turned the tide. They had broken the Dominion. And now, the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what humanity would do next. Would they seize control? Would they become conquerors themselves? Instead, humanity did something no one expected. They walked away. "We didn't fight this war for power," Voss told the Council. "We fought because it needed to be won." They didn't demand tribute. They didn't demand rulership. Instead, humanity offered something else. Knowledge. Strategy. A new way to fight, not just wars, but tyranny itself. Across the galaxy, new alliances formed. Former Dominion slave species, once scattered and broken, began rebuilding, with human veterans training their people in warfare, resilience, and the art of never giving up. Humanity had proven that even the most powerful empire could be toppled. And that knowledge alone was unstoppable. ##### The ghost of war. But even in victory, whispers spread. The aliens had seen what humanity was truly capable of. They had watched an underdog species dismantle the greatest war machine in existence through sheer willpower. And deep down, a single, undeniable fear took root across the stars. If humans could do this to the Dominion, what else were they capable of? The war was over. The Dominion was gone. And yet, the galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had entered the stars as underdogs. A minor species, overlooked and underestimated. Now, they were something else entirely. ###### The galaxy holds its breath. The Galactic Council had expected humanity to demand rulership, to carve out an empire of their own in the wake of their victory. But instead, the humans simply went home. Their fleets returned to Sol. Their soldiers returned to their families. Their scientists, engineers, and spies, all the minds that had broken the Dominion, began rebuilding their own worlds, not seizing new ones. But the galaxy could not forget what had happened. Every species, every government, every leader had seen the truth. Humanity did not seek power. They were power. And that was far more terrifying. ######## The new balance of power. For the first time in history, there was no dominant empire. No species stood above the rest. The Dominion's former vassals, newly freed, forged their own paths. The Galactic Council restructured, ensuring no single race could ever rise to such tyranny again. But in every meeting, every alliance, every political decision, one question remained unspoken. What will the humans think? Wars between lesser powers began to dwindle, not out of diplomacy, but because no one wanted to risk drawing humanity's attention. The mere idea of human intervention was now a deterrent more powerful than any fleet. ###### The Silent Watchers. While the council debated, while new nations rose and fell, humanity did something no one expected. They watched. Scattered across the galaxy, hidden among the stars, were human operatives, whispering in the ears of revolutionaries, sabotaging the rise of tyrants, ensuring that no empire like the Dominion would ever exist again. The aliens had once feared the Dominion's war fleets, their unstoppable armadas. Now they feared something far worse. Humans didn't rule. They ensured that no one else did either. ###### The final warning. Decades after the war, a new species, the Drethari, rose in power. A militaristic race, ambitious and ruthless, they believed enough time had passed. The lessons of the Dominion's fall were old history. They gathered their fleets. They began expansion, demanding tribute from weaker worlds. Then, one night, their supreme chancellor received an anonymous message. A simple image. A burning Tyran warship. And beneath it, a message written in the Drethari language. We remember. The next morning, the Drethari fleets withdrew. Their expansion ended. And across the galaxy, a new understanding took hold. Humanity did not conquer. They did not demand tribute. But the moment anyone threatened to become the next Dominion, they would return. And they would end it. Because the greatest weapon in the universe was not a warship. It was not a fleet. It was humanity itself. And the galaxy would never forget.